Thanks everyone for coming today again. Definitely appreciate it. So today's talk, we'll do something probably a little different from what you might be used to seeing at a security conference. Who here has read the RareSkills blog before, or at least some articles on it? Okay, so what we're gonna share is some of the most people tell me that our writing is good. So I want to talk about how does that happen? Okay, so really all you have to do is just practice a lot. So thanks for coming to this presentation, everyone. I appreciate it. Okay, seriously, it could be a little bit more helpful than that, right? Here's the real secret. Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's do this for real. So before I give you guys some advice about here's some techniques you can use to write better, here's some processes, I need to add a caveat that I've been writing longer than some of you have been alive. So right now it's the thing if you want to put yourself out there, you write on Twitter, right? At least that's a good way to get started. I definitely recommend it. There wasn't Twitter around when I started writing, so I was publishing in paper magazines, some stuff about hardware circuits and things like that. So you just use this as a asterisk to everything that I say, but I still think that I can share some things so that you can get up to speed faster. Okay. First of all, when we say an article is good, what do we even mean by good? Did I come away feeling good about myself? I think if you want a North Star, right? I guess that's been trending recently. What's a North Star on good writing? A good article conveys a valuable idea with minimal relative effort from the reader. I'm going to be structuring the entire talk today around this. Okay, so first of all, let's focus on a valuable idea. Not all topics are valuable, right? So a couple examples that I have here are, how can you understand how ZK works without using the math? Well, you can't really. I mean, you can have maybe a vague idea of what's going on, but if you're saying, oh, look, here's a Where's Waldo analogy, nobody can come away from a translation of Where's Waldo into actual code. So the information is not useful. You can't eventually turn it into a good decision or into a bug bounty or anything like that. So when I say valuable information, I literally mean it in an economic sense. This is going to help you the information presented in the article will help you optimize your decisions so that you make more money in the long run. Now the gap between making money and obtaining the knowledge might be long, but there should be a sequence of causality between it. Algorithms that are quantum secure. You could write about it, and other people have, but how many of us are the core protocol engineer at a blockchain who's going to read a high-level article about which algorithms are quantum secure or not and then change it, right? Probably none of us. And if you are, you're not going to be reading a high-level article. You're going to be reading the academic papers. So that's an example of information which is it might be interesting, but it's not valuable. Something that's interesting but not valuable is what we would call edutainment. You feel good about learning something, maybe you feel smarter after doing it, but you can't turn that knowledge into money in the long run. When something is valuable, there's also an element of scarcity to it, right? Gold is scarce, therefore it's valuable, yada yada. Same thing would happen with different topics. There's a million articles, not a million, but there's a lot of articles on ERC20 and reentrancy and how to do Hello World and Solidity. So I'll talk about how you don't necessarily have to be the only person to have written on the topic to make it valuable. Did I mostly catch up on all this? Yeah. If something's valuable or not, it's not hard to tell, right? I can use this information our try-catch article did extremely well. Everyone was tweeting about it. Why? It's valuable. I want to know the edge cases where Solidity try-catch is going to break or not. Bug walkthroughs are valuable because you can later pattern match it to some other bug that you're looking at. What else? Obviously, protocol walkthroughs or saving gas on smart contract literally saves money. So the information is literally valuable, as long as you're not over-optimizing it, of course. So let's talk about two kinds of valuable. One is you're the first person to talk about it, and the other one is you're not the first, but you're going to have an angle that's very useful to people. If you are the first to talk about something, your life is actually pretty easy. Let me just kind of hop to this slide over here. So you guys know what I say if someone says a tweet is a banger, right? That's kind of slang, but you guys know what that means, right? Right. So what we call a banger on Twitter is not something where they edited it so perfectly and had the flow of ideas and the prose is perfect. They just had a take that hasn't been heard before. And oftentimes those takes come from hard-won experience that other people don't have. So over here you have an example of Keon from earlier, from Monad. He's saying, I don't think advisors are a good idea most of the time. Now he's in a position to say that because he's used advisors, he's probably been an advisor, he's worked with other companies who have used advisors, so he knows there's a lot of pitfalls here and it's probably not worth it. So most of us who are not founding a bunch of companies or working with founders very directly wouldn't know that. So he's able to tell what we call alpha, right? This is alpha. So just the sheer uniqueness and novelty of the idea from hard-won experience makes it valuable. You don't have to convey it well. You don't need fancy graphics. It can be badly written, and it's still useful to people if you're the first person to talk about it. Here's, I guess, now I'm not saying I got more impressions than Keon because I screenshotted his not long after he tweeted it, whereas mine was a day old by that time. But I was saying, okay, everyone was griping about the Ethereum Foundation and whatever framework they're using to make decisions. And I said, yeah, I understand, but I've also made similar decisions at RareSkills. So at least I understand the logic of why they're doing it and why it could work in the long term. And so I was able to share some of my own personal experiences, which nobody else has had, and pattern match that against what the Ethereum Foundation was doing and said, yes, there's serious drawbacks to it. It's very risky, but there are pros to it. So that made an impression because I was able to share a unique perspective that wasn't there before. So if you want to be the first person, oftentimes that just means if you're working hard to obtain information that's hard to get, that's actually the hard part of writing, is even obtaining the new information in the first place, the alpha. Now, if you're in a situation where you are not the first, we were not the first to write about ZK, we're not the first to talk about proxy patterns, et cetera, but you can still create writing that other people consider to be good. However, because the idea isn't unique anymore, you need to put a lot more effort into making that idea clearly expressed. And that's actually what we're going to be spending most of our time here talking about. So I've already finished part one. If you have a really cool, unique idea, you don't have to worry too much about writing it well because the idea itself is valuable. But if you're sharing something that kind of exists already, then it's going to take a lot of effort. Okay? But speaking of not a lot of effort, let's move on to the second part of the definition, which is minimal relative effort from the reader. Now, relative makes this a bit more verbose, but that's a very important qualifier because some subjects are just easier to learn than others. I think a reasonably competent programmer can pick up Solidity in 3 days or something like that. If you wanted to learn Rust as your first language, it's technically possible, and people have done crazier things. But it's not possible to learn ZK, or formal verification, which has some interesting similarities, without at least knowing one programming language first. Because you're trying to, what ZK does is you take a program and you're trying to prove that it was executed correctly. And with formal verification, you're taking a program saying that the execution is going to follow certain rules. So unless you already have an intuition about what execution is, then you can't learn formal verification or ZK. So that's the relative effort. There's more ground to cross on certain subjects. But there's still some paths to that destination that are shorter than others. And your job as the writer is to help people find the shortest path. Okay? I'll skip these 2 bullet points. Let's keep going. The trouble with reducing the effort for the reader is that this is a very highly multidimensional problem. Here's all the ways that you could optimize your article, and this is not anywhere close to a complete list. If you use fewer words, in general, you will be more clear, because the reader has less stuff to keep in their short-term memory. But you could take that too far and under-explain things. Adding compelling examples is very useful in general, but if you share a lot of examples without telling the reader how to triangulate between them, then that's not going to help them as much as it could. Just if you mess up the wording in a sentence, that can really throw off the reader a lot. Here's a mistake that I make a lot. When you use what's called a demonstrative pronoun, and it's not clear what you're talking about, then the reader can get completely thrown off of the road. So unfortunately, I can't go through all of this. And some of these suggestions are contradictory, which is you don't want to have unnecessary words in there. You don't want to be too conversational. But if you're too terse and too direct, then it's actually kind of jarring to read it. There does need to be a little bit of smoothness to it. So how do you balance those two? Well, I unfortunately can't give you a clear answer for that. I'm just saying that this is highly multidimensional. But probably one of the most impactful dimensions is being simple. And here I have some quotes from famous people, and being optimally simple. I'll explain optimally in a second. So I don't know if Einstein is actually the original author of this quote, but he says everything should be as simple as possible, but not simpler. And I think if you get that right, you're already 30% of the way there, at least conservatively. One of my favorite subjects and I'm saying stuff is trash. Maybe I'm just trashing my competitors, but seriously, there's a lot of tutorials on ZK that are trash. Why? Because they are not optimally simple. like I said, if you use Where's Waldo as an example for teaching ZK, nobody can turn that into code, and it does not give them a mental model that's useful later. In fact, it gives them the wrong mental model. Now they have to undo what you taught them and actually learn the real thing. So that's a bad thing. Now, on the right, I asked ChatGPT to give the most mathematically complicated explanation for how ZK proofs work. But this is what a lot of tutorials look like, and most people are going to be very intimidated looking at something like that. So now, written to another cryptographer, that's probably fine. But if this is not the language that you use all the time, that's not the language you should use to express your idea in, or at least your target audience. So that was, I think one thing that made the ZK book so successful is that it found an approximately correct middle ground between the two. I'm not saying we got it perfect, but one of the reasons the ZK book was successful was because we tried to be as simple as possible, but not simpler. Now, interestingly, I will say that's not all of it, because for those of you who've been following it, you know we did an update on the revision of the ZK book. One thing that the first version did wrong was that some of the chapters were too long. So we didn't break up I'll talk about breaking up ideas later, but even if you found the optimally simple mental model to use, how you parse that apart, there's a lot of possibilities for that. I'll get to that in a second. But being simple will get you at least 30% of the way there. Okay, and when I say optimal, that's for a certain audience, right? So for a certain audience, this thing on the right might actually be right? If they're used to speaking in math and have a cryptography thing, then leverage that. They'll learn it faster, right? There's a reason that some people write like that, because it's the right way to write for some people. But let's even think about something that's easy. How would you teach Solidity for someone who falls into one of these 5 buckets? Would the tutorial look the same if your goal was to get them to learn as fast as possible? For someone who's been doing compilers, I might teach them the EVM even before I teach them the Solidity. That might help them learn a mental model quicker, because that's how they're used to thinking. And then they'll quickly understand, why is Solidity designed the way that it is? But for someone who has coded in a year for JavaScript, you should put off discussing the EVM as late as possible, right? Because that's probably going to be their first exposure to a VM. So this is something you really want to think about. Now, we do have do I have it here? Yeah, we do have a resource here for Learn Solidity. We don't really advertise ourselves as a Web2 to Web3 sort of a company. But the reason that we created it is because we really felt like for points 3 and 4 over here, there wasn't really a good resource for someone who's experienced and wants to learn Solidity fast. So that's what we created this for. But this is probably not the best tutorial for someone who's been using JavaScript for a year. Okay, so when you're writing to, these are some. We don't have a leveling system for Solidity developers or auditors. I mean, well, companies have internal leveling systems, but we don't have a common language to describe someone's level in our industry. And we all know that years of experience is a bad metric, because nobody has like 6 years of experience in Solana, for example. But as you've gone through your journey, I've taught a lot of people in the boot camps. Your journey tends not to be that different from other people on average. People tend to cover topics in the same orders because there's an intrinsic dependency in the information. Like, how can you talk about hacks if you don't even know how an ERC20 token works, right? So when you're writing, you first really want to nail down what's the level of understanding for my reader, because it's going to dramatically change what is optimally simple. And remember, being optimally simple is the first step. So what does it mean to be optimally simple? I want to talk about mental models for a bit. Let's talk about the guy we named out one of our fragrances after. So Elon Musk, here is a quote. It says, "One bit of advice. It is important to view knowledge as sort of a semantic tree. Make sure you understand the fundamental principles, i.e. the trunk and big branches, before you get into the leaves and details, or there's nothing for them to hang on to." So let's say that you are teaching invariant testing or something like that, right? So the idea is, regardless of what happens, the protocol is always going to be, let's use an example from earlier. Someone puts money into the protocol, and if they take it out in the same block, there should be no way for them to make a profit. Okay, that's easy enough to understand, but that's because you have a bunch of supporting knowledge. Some people might not even have been exposed to the notion of deposit or what kind of vaults we use. So there's a lot of implied prerequisites in that. So you need to figure out, what are the prerequisites that went into understanding that so seamlessly, which, based on the level of my audience, which prerequisites am I going to include in my explanation? I may or may not explain to you a 4.626 vault, depending on what I think your level is at. And then once I've picked the topics that I'm going to include, how am I going to fit them together? And that's tricky, because when you present a bunch of ideas, how you choose to tie them together the number of possibilities gets up high very fast. I don't think that needs to scare you per se, because like when you're playing chess, you have a lot of moves at your disposal, but you don't literally, loop through every possible move and determine which one is good. You kind of use some heuristics about which mental models are good or not. Same thing when you're auditing a protocol. You're not going to consider every single possible state transition that could happen. You're just going to say, hey, these state transitions are going to be more likely to yield a bug than not, so I'm going to explore those. And the same thing is as writing. You can get an intuition, despite the fact that there's a lot of ways to combine the ideas together, only a few of them make sense. But that comes from practice. How do you get good at chess? How do you build that intuition for chess, for cutting down your search space? You play a lot of chess games. How do you build that intuition for auditing? Like everyone says this, just audit. Stop doing a bunch of other things. Just get some practice. Same thing. The reason why writing can be hard at first if you haven't been doing it a lot is because at step 2, you might not even be explicitly thinking about what ideas am I going to present and how am I going to tie them together. But even if you're deliberately thinking about this, then you have to cut down the search space of which mental models you're going to use. And when I write articles, it's not rare for me to delete them and start over again. Why? Because I was going down a path where I chose to tie the ideas together in a certain way and it just didn't work. So I have to start over. That's a big part of it. But you can cut down the search space with practice. And how you tie ideas together can be tricky. One thing that even after a few years of teaching, delegate call has always been a fun topic for me, because does someone really understand delegate call before they understand the EVM, or does it happen afterwards? So, well, some people would agree with you. I've seen it, I've taught both ways, and it was really tricky about which mental model makes it work for people. What I ended up discovering is that it's a co-requisite. So in our proxy book it should be taught interweaved between other related topics so that people can see them in rapid sequence. And I found that to be something where people could absorb the information more seamlessly. But is it a co-requisite, a prerequisite, or something else? There's no way to check your work other than going through the effort of writing the article and seeing what people think. So the feedback process is slow. All right. Here are just some general tips. One thing I really want to talk about is at the bottom. Just write. You might have heard the suggestion if you took like an English class. Put your ideas down and don't worry about how the ideas are connected together yet. So when we write our books, we do come up with a roadmap of what we're going to follow, but we don't obsess about writing the articles in the order that we initially put on our roadmap. Because as we write an article, we oftentimes discover, oh wait, there's actually a hidden prerequisite over there. Now we need to expand that, and we expand it. Oh hey, there's another hidden prerequisite over here that we don't expect our audience to know. We need to expand on that. Oh wait a second, now we have a circular dependency. And you can't, unless your brain can hold a ton of information at the same time, you're not going to see those dependencies appear until you actually write it down. So I would say just write a lot of stuff down, and don't be afraid to start over and reshuffle your writings, because you might find yourself at a local optima depending on how you chose to connect your ideas. So writing, it's not just about, okay, I wrote it, I got it structurally correct, now I'm going to change the wording. Internally, we're deleting entire sections, we're replacing entire sections with something else, we're changing the order, changing the examples. You have to be ready to make very, very, very big changes. Okay, let's move on to the next one. I've been kind of hinting at this, but writing takes more coffee than you think it does. People like throwing out, why is that? Because first of all, you have to understand the subject, okay? Not hard if you're a security researcher. But then but the knowledge exists in your intuition. It's not encoded in natural language. It's encoded with, whatever neuron synapse connections you have. And so you need to turn that into something that someone else can quickly process. So just the act of going from intuitive encoding to natural language, I mean like English, like spoken language, going from intuitive encoding to a natural language encoding itself takes a lot of work. And then once you've figured out that encoding, figuring out the mental model that you're going to use, how you're going to express it. So first of all, you have to arrive at the mental model, and then you have to express the mental model clearly. You guys know that training large language models is expensive, right? To throw in a ton of data, have to use multi-megawatt data centers to do it. But large language models are kind of mimicking a similar process to the writing process. You have a bunch of information and you're trying to distill it down into something that's succinct. And the succinct thing is, what the large language model is learning, the weights that it's using to encode its understanding of the world. Now, arriving at that encoding requires a lot of randomness and trial and error. So writing is not something you sit down and just create something really awesome. If you did that, that's probably because you front-loaded all the work like I was talking about earlier. I talked about, Keon saying, hey, here's my experience with advisors, here's my experience with the Ethereum Foundation, and so on. It was easy for us to write about that, but acquiring that information took a lot of work. So one way or another, you're going to have to put in the work at some point. And in terms of actual cost, I charge more than $100 an hour, so please don't ask me for services at that rate. But this is just a pretty industry average rate for auditors, right, I think. It costs conservatively $4,000 just to write a normal article. All right, and there's some people who are on salary who can go a month or two without publishing anything. So multiply that paycheck times two. And then that's not including other people reviewing. I'll get to review in a second. Other people in the company have to spend time reviewing that. So why does RareSkills produce good work? Well, just because we invest an almost irrational amount of resources into it. And I think that's something that people really miss out on, because if you try to hire a writer nowadays, it's like, hire me, I'll write 500 words for whatever dollars is going to be SEO optimized, something like that. If you're writing just so that your blog looks active, it doesn't take that much resource to do it. But if you're trying to encode a difficult subject, you have to cross a very, very big search space. So I would say if content is part of your strategy, just be prepared to invest probably add another zero to whatever you're thinking. Yeah, this is usually what I tell people. Yeah, wow, Jeffrey, it's hard. You just haven't put in the work. But we intuitively we understand this, right? Why can I not find bugs in protocol? How many hours have you spent auditing? Oh, there's your answer. I mean, that's usually what happens 95% of the time, right? Now the question then becomes why does it seems like finding bugs in a protocol should be harder than writing, because English majors can write and they're not paid as well. So why is there a disparity here? Well, it depends on the level of difficulty of what you're writing about, right? If you're just describing like, hey, this coffee tastes like hazelnut or something like that, that wasn't hard. But if you're trying to convey a multi-dimensional problem, like here's how the protocol interacts, here's the invariant that was violated, you're trying to convey a huge amount of bandwidth into a small space. And that figuring out the compression representation that's going to make that work, what I'm calling the mental model, it takes a lot of search and trial and error to discover one that works. And I have it on the screen here. Here's one reason why people can be so amazing at auditing but struggle with writing, because it's an even higher dimensional problem. Now, about economics, obviously I've tried to hey, can I find someone early in their career who's not going to charge as much? I think for some topics it can work because there is a lot of trial and error and search space. Having like an intern do it, hey, just try out a bunch of stuff and see what works. It works up to a certain point, but it doesn't work for complicated subjects. Like there's no way that I could delegate writing about ZK to someone who's only been in industry for 2 years. It's not possible. Because one nice thing that comes with experience is you learn more ways to connect ideas. So that gives the more experienced author, they can search a wider domain of the search space about how to connect ideas. So yeah, it's not so simple that you can just hire someone cheaper to do it. Okay, I think I've kind of covered this. There's a lot of brute force searching involved. But in terms of creating the value, remember the first step that I said, why is writing valuable, is because you are providing monetary value to the reader. One way that you can provide monetary value is just saving them time. If someone is able to consume your material and learn in 10 hours what would have taken them 30, and let's just say they're paid $100 an hour, right? Then that's 20 times 100 that you just saved them, which is that you're giving out thousands of dollars every time someone reads your article, which is a huge amount of value. So that's why I think it still makes sense in the long term to invest like that, because even though we're putting in a huge amount of money into producing the content, the net amount of money saved in the industry is, I'm pretty darn sure it's higher. So I mean, at least all the bug bounties and audit results that people attributed to reading RareSkills exceeds the costs of the investment that we've put in. So I think in that sense, it's created what we would call like a consumer surplus, right? More value came out than was put in. So I think it is worth it, but if you want to create something valuable, it just takes a lot more work. Okay, this slide is out of place. We should have talked about it at the simple thing. I don't know why I didn't move it yet. Here's some more quotes about why being simple is great. Okay, let's talk about finding a good mental model. Let's do a quick exercise. How would you describe to a blind person what a square is? I want you guys to actually think about that for a second. The reason why I like this example is because you intuitively know what a square is. You would recognize it instantly. Same thing for certain bugs that you know how to pattern match, or certain DeFi primitives that you recognize instantly. Like most of you guys would say, oh yeah, they're using the MasterChef algorithm when they're a staking thing. I get it right away. But how do you turn your hours of practice of intuition into something verbal that can be communicated? Now, if the reason why a lot of ZK is hard is because people use literal mathematical definitions for things, which is not intuitive for most people. If you avoid math, then the temptation can be to be verbose. Well, think of all the shapes and imagine this, that, and the other. Here's my attempt at explaining it to a blind person. So I think this, I'll just read it off. Imagine tracing your finger around the inside of a box. Now imagine walking around an empty room while only touching the walls. Now suppose the box has equal size on each side, and the room walls all have the same size too. They require the same number of steps to traverse. What do both of these have in common? So this is not at all the best explanation for a square. I'm not saying I figured this one out. But what made this work? Well, it used a few devices. One is it ties it to real examples that are tangible. So people can easily visualize something that's not abstract, thinking something that's concrete and that they've experienced. So if you're able to tie to previous experiences of people, remember how Elon Musk said facts should not be hanging out by themselves? This ties it to something that they already have. Okay, so I've talked about being optimally simple and picking the right mental model for your audience, and the fact that it's going to take more effort to discover it and convey that mental model than you think it will. This is the last point. Writing is more about reviewing than it is about writing. So if you type at, 70 words a minute, you can get a 1,000-word article out pretty fast, right? So why does writing take so long then? Are you just a slow typer? Here is a really funny video that I think was shared on Twitter at some point. It's probably where I find out about everything. But this bearded guy, what he does professionally is he works with music artists and helps them produce good music. That might say, well, what makes some music better than others? Like a lot of pop music actually isn't that good. But he's been quite successful and made a lot of money doing it, and you would probably recognize a lot of the songs that he helped produce. And an interviewer was asking him about the nature of his job, and I want to share it with you.
Do you play instruments?
Barely.
Do you know how to work a soundboard?
No. I have no technical ability, and I know nothing about music.
You must know something.
Well, I know what I like and what I don't like, and I'm decisive about what I like and what I don't like.
So what are you being paid for?
The confidence that I have in my taste and my ability to express what I feel has proven helpful for artists.
Rubin released his debut book, The Creative Act.
So he might say, oh man, this guy's just pulling our legs. I don't know any music. Okay, so why are you being paid millions of dollars, actually? He says, well, I can really just tell them clearly what I'm feeling. That's actually a big part of the RareSkills review process, is finding people who can not just tell you why, is an article good or bad? Most people can, is this article good or bad? Great, but this doesn't give any directional feedback. Remember how I said it's an iterative process writing? Well, that means you need to have a goal and you need to know if you're getting closer to that goal or not. So can you articulate why it was good or bad? And then can you tell the writer what they need to do to make it better? This is where I distinguish like a good reviewer from a really, really good reviewer, which is they highlight a certain thing, say this didn't make sense. Okay, well, what do you expect the author to do? Just try 3 other combinations? It didn't make sense because it referred to something that you hadn't talked about before. Or it didn't make sense because you used a terminology that hasn't been introduced yet. Or it didn't make sense because it appears to contradict something else. Or it didn't make sense because it wasn't, these are the facts that I was able to infer from what you were saying, but these facts don't seem concrete enough for me to do anything with them. You guys see the difference between that? So, at level 1, people will just say, I don't even know what I just read. But over here, this is exactly where I got lost. Can you guys see how if you get feedback like that, you will get to your goal a lot faster? Interestingly, this is something I even really realized even yesterday. I've worked with some people who are so good at giving this kind of feedback, like that bearded guy. But like the bearded guy, they can't produce music. I was like, man, these guys give such good feedback. Why don't you write for us? And then they write, and I'm like, what the heck is this? So, but on the other hand, I've seen writers who write really well, and when I ask them to give me feedback on it, I feel like you're not giving me enough here, dude. And I can give that same article to someone else for feedback, and they give me way better feedback. So I'm still learning this, but those 2 skills don't seem as closely related as they would seem. I don't have any alpha on that because it's only something I just became conscious of recently. But Maybe next year I'll have something to say about that. This part is what we really shoot for. I think level 6 is the starving artist, where you invest so much to the point where you run out of money. We don't want to get to that point, but if we say like looks good to merge, like on GitHub, right? That's because code has a funny thing where if your code is good enough, the computer will understand it and execute according to the specification. But there isn't such a black and white thing with natural language. You can write something good, and there's still room to improve it. And no matter, I like to think I'm a pretty darn good writer. I don't know. One of the person who gave me that feedback may or may not be in this room. So because you don't know how you're sounding to the reader, right? It makes sense to you. And I was just like, man, I've seen so many people write on this, they failed, I'm gonna get it right this time. And this was like this year sometime when I did this. And so I would be pretty confident in my abilities. And it's just like, dude, I have no idea what the heck you're writing about. So you need feedback. If you don't have that, you're not, you could post something that you think is great and it's a total whiff. And people are polite and they're not going to tell you, dude, that article you published just sucked. How often do you get feedback like that? No, you have to ask people for feedback, right? And then give them permission to tell you what's wrong. I'll just give some more examples of feedback that when people leave comments like this, I give them a thumbs up. So this took effort to understand. Like I understood what you were saying. I learned something valuable, but I had to read it 4 times. And that's the okay, it's good you learn something valuable, but great is you learn something valuable with less effort. So you could say, hey, you need to expand on this thought some more. Or maybe you just need to structure this long run-on paragraph into bullet points or something. So here's some ways that you might be able to do to make it easier to understand. Because we don't just want the idea to get conveyed. We want it to get conveyed with minimal relative effort. When you're saying something, it's clear in your head, right? Because people oftentimes treat writing like, hey, I'm writing notes just to document everything I'm learning, and then the connection, they really learn the subject and they're able to use it, but the writing is lagged behind the progression of their brain. And then when they read their own writing, their brain auto-completes the parts that are missing. So a reviewer will be able to point it out. This raised questions on my end. Okay, this is an immutable variable, but why? Right? Why did they make this immutable? Because does that actually make sense? So a good reviewer is someone who's going to be skeptical and say, can you really explain why this is the case? Asking for more examples is good as long as you're not just saying that blindly. The other mistake I see with reviews when other people do it is. In English classes, the teacher usually gives feedback on like, your grammar was wrong, your spelling was wrong, blah, blah, blah. Or maybe you need to change up your vocabulary a little bit about that. That information is totally useless at the beginning stage, right? Because remember, if you're trying to iterate towards a goal, first of all, you don't even know if you have the right mental model. So if the mental model is wrong, why are you worried about the wording, right? So first of all, we would talk about, are you presenting the right ideas in the first place? Is there ideas that are totally missing, or ideas that are totally unnecessary, or ideas that you're trying to express a relationship that doesn't really work? So we try to really focus on high-level things early on, and then more low-level things later. Like, oh, if you word it like this, it will be cooler. There's time and place for that feedback, but that's when you're closer to publication. Okay, and another kind of feedback is something I get asked about in RareSkills is like, oh, how do you know you're publishing the right thing or a wrong thing? Internally, you can check yourself either by writing a mathematical proof or checking that your code runs, right? And writing tests, the whole normal thing. I mean, it's the same question. How do you know your smart contract doesn't have a bug in it? Well, you do the best you can and get feedback. But when you're getting feedback in the code thing, we usually think, I'm going to hire the most competent auditor I can afford, or auditors. You should be getting multiple audits, obviously. But that's one kind of feedback. Oftentimes, you're not really going to provide value teaching something to somebody who already knows the subject. Though we've had like Open Zeppelin has reviewed some of our articles, right? I mean, they've been very helpful, but they're not learning from us about how their own libraries work, right? So what we really want to focus on is the first two, which is someone who's learning the subject for the first time is going to have the hardest time with that. So they're going to give you the most signal if you are explaining at the right pace and you picked a good mental model. Someone who is your peer will tell you, dude, you're being too wordy. Like you're explaining stuff that doesn't actually need to be here. And someone who's more advanced, actually rare to get useful feedback at the most expert level, but they might say, oh, here's a cool bug that happened in the past in like 2018 you can refer to or something like that. But more reviewers is generally good. This is one reason why our articles tend to cost a lot, is because at least 3 people have to look at it. If some subjects are so difficult we can't find 3 reviewers, but 4 or 5 is very common for stuff that's less, that more people understand. Now, I'm not scared to share all of this with you guys, because one thing I'm really proud of with RareSkills is we've set an expectation that it takes a long time, we invest a lot. Because we're a writing first company and our brand is tied to how well we can write. But for other people, writing oftentimes serves as, it's a form of marketing, it's a form of SEO, something to do when we're not doing anything. Writing at the highest levels with the most clarity just takes a lot of work. And this is something, some people have said, Jeffrey, can I publish on your blog? We welcome guest contributions, by the way. So we've had outside people contribute, it's really awesome. But something I need to warn you about is it's worse than an ice bath, because you stay in there for 4 months sometimes. So can you keep writing and just like, no, you need to change this? It really sucks. Like, even if the person is nice, like, I put so much effort into this and you're telling me I need to change it again. And then the reviewer might say something like, this is better than last time, but if you do it this way, it'll be even better. Now I have to do it again. And you're writing on the same subject over and over again, so at a certain point you get really bored of it. And then you have to keep going, because the article needs to get published at some point. So can you withstand, and some of our reviewers are not even that nice, which I'm working on that internally, but sometimes like, dude, what the hell is this? So I don't think it's nice to give feedback like that. Even like culturally, how you give feedback takes some tuning, right? But you still need to be clear. There's ways to mitigate this, which is, I'm bored. Okay, put it down and come back to it. So we work on articles, we don't touch them for a month, sometimes 2 months, until the boredom goes away and we pick them back up again. So there's ways to get around this, but either way, that makes the writing process even longer. So there is the financial cost in building the article, but the psychological cost is there too. And I've found that a lot of people can't deal with it. So that is, when I hire people, I really look for, can you really, really hang in there for much longer than you think you need to? Okay. Yeah, I've kind of talked about this. Let's actually talk about LLMs really quickly, because I got asked, this is my last point before I wrap things up and make an announcement. Isn't ChatGPT going to put you out of a job? Well, no, I don't think so, because it can't really express ideas that haven't been found before. And to find useful ideas, if LLMs, with all of their knowledge, have not made novel discoveries in physics or chemistry or anything like that. But what makes writing useful is the novel idea well presented. So I feel actually quite safe. But can you use LLMs? Here are ways that I have used an LLM to do reviews. Now this might say, Jeffrey, whoa, this is really cool. Yeah, feel free to use it. It doesn't actually help that much. It's just more like, I'm going to run my code through a linter or static analysis just to like catch things. Because the funny thing about like most static analysis tools is they can catch stuff that you would have caught anyway, but it's nice that you didn't have to think about it, right? So I think LLMs are kind of like that also. And yeah, don't trust GPT. I think you should know this already, but it really outputs nonsense. But 20% of the time it's useful. It's kind of interesting because I used Grammarly, that was kind of a thing. I would only accept about 50% of its suggestions, and GPT is like 20%, so I don't know if we're moving in the wrong direction here, but there we go. So if your goal is to be able to write better, same thing with auditing and coding. You got to put the time in. Be consistent. Try to do it. Some small thing that you can commit to for a while. The only thing that really changes as you get more advanced is when you're a beginner, don't sweat the quality too much. Force yourself to get it done. Do the best you can. If you're able to get feedback, get it, but publish it and start on another topic, because you need to do a lot of reps. But as you get more advanced, you need to think about, okay, this is publishable. This is good enough. Someone could get value out of it. But how can they get even more value, which usually comes from making it easier to digest? And then that takes some practice, but it's a skill that that most people can learn. Okay, so here is the summary where we're going to wrap things up. You want to be optimally simple. And optimally simple means you pick the right mental model for the target audience who you need to be deliberate about picking. Be ready to spend more time than you think you need to discovering and expressing that mental model. And a lot of that time is going to be spent getting feedback and reviews, which are a very, very important part of the writing process. So because reviews are so important to the quality of writing, we're announcing some new product here called Rare Review. So if you guys want to work with the editorial team and get feedback on your work, we don't have a landing page for this. We don't even know how we're going to structure it yet. So this is a form where you can let us know what you want to get out of it. Just give us some general thoughts. No idea about the launch date, but just fill out the form, leave your email there, and we'll get back to you. Just to give you guys a bit of FOMO, at RareSkills, we're known for, hey, we release free content. We don't plan on releasing free content about writing, because with auditing, it's 85% of its practice, but it is helpful to know the alpha, right? Oh, here's a bug. Here's how you can tie the ideas together. But with writing, reading about writing is almost as silly as about reading about going to the gym. Yeah, you read some stuff so you don't injure yourself, but you're not going to get stronger or even work out that much better by reading about it. A lot of people who I know are very buff haven't read anything about exercising. So it's not that we're trying to withhold the knowledge, it's just that you're tricking yourself into thinking you're getting somewhere if you read it versus you just spend the 30 minutes writing. Okay, so I'm actually wrapping it up for real this time. Thanks everyone for listening. If you haven't.
Thanks, Jeff, for that insightful session. We didn't forget you. We got a gift for you as well. For anyone who doesn't know, Jeff launched a new protocol about 2 weeks ago. He had a baby, first baby was born. Thankfully, the baby came out 2 weeks early so that he could be here. Otherwise, this event wouldn't have happened. So we got a little gift for the rare baby. Yes, and a card from the team. And the other one is signed by all the students. So yeah, hopefully